In a world where compassion often goes unnoticed and the innocent are left to fend for themselves, one young boy's moment of bravery would prove that true heroism comes not from age or strength, but from the heart. This is the story of Ethan, an 8-year-old boy who, in the face of adversity, will show us what it truly means to be a hero. Ethan's life is far from ordinary. Growing up in the heart of the bustling city, where the streets are always crowded and the noise never stops, he's just another face in the crowd. The world around him moves fast, but Ethan has learned to navigate it with a quiet sense of resilience. He's not a kid who demands attention, nor does he seek the limelight. In fact, most people barely notice him. In a city where everyone is rushing, where the sound of honking horns and hurried footsteps fill the air, it's easy for someone like Ethan to go unseen. His world is one of shadows, darker streets and overlooked corners where children like him are often forgotten. But this day will be different. On what seems like an ordinary afternoon, Ethan's life is about to take a turn that will change everything. While walking through the busy streets, he spots something that no one else seems to notice: a small, helpless baby, abandoned in a corner near a rundown alley. The child lies alone, vulnerable, and forgotten, in a dark space that no one cares to check. It's a moment that no one else sees, but Ethan does. It's as if time slows down for him, and everything around him fades, leaving only the baby and the urgency to act. Ethan stands there, his small body trembling, heart racing. His instinct is to rush forward, to do something, but doubt creeps in. Who would believe him? He's just a kid, after all, and not just any kid. He's a black boy with no family, no support system, no voice in a world that's quick to dismiss him. The streets, the people, the system, they all ignore him. To them, Ethan's struggles don't matter. His story doesn't matter. He's just another face, another forgotten child. But as the seconds tick by, a sense of determination rises within him. He cannot let the baby remain where it is. This is more than just a random encounter. This is his moment, the moment that will define who he is. Ethan knows that if he doesn't do something, no one will. His heart pounds in his chest as he approaches the baby, his hand shaking as he reaches out. The streets, full of people who pass by without a glance, are suddenly silent to him. It's as if he's the only one who sees. With every step closer to the baby, the reality of the situation sinks in. This isn't just about rescuing an innocent life. It's about challenging everything the world has ever told him. The world isn't kind to children like him. It's not kind to anyone who doesn't fit into the mold, who doesn't have the resources or the support. In a world that writes off the underprivileged, the unseen, and the unheard, Ethan has been invisible for so long. His skin, his age, his circumstances, all of it has put him in a position where no one expects him to do anything heroic. In fact, the very idea that someone like him could make a difference seems absurd. But that's exactly what this moment will demand of him: to do the impossible, to defy the prejudices that seek to keep him down, to rise above the limitations others have placed on him. Ethan will have to find the courage to trust in himself, to believe that even though he's just one small child in a world full of noise, his actions can change everything. Will he be able to get anyone to believe him? Will his voice be heard in a city where people pass by without a second glance? Will he be able to save the baby, or will time run out before someone else notices? The stakes have never been higher for Ethan. What happens next will be a testament not just to his courage, but to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the world seems to turn a blind eye. In a moment where no one is looking, one boy's bravery will prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most power. Ethan may be small, but his heart is mighty. Growing up in a poor neighborhood where dreams often fade before they can even begin, he's had to navigate a world that doesn't always show kindness or understanding. In a city where the sound of sirens often drowns out the cries of the voiceless, Ethan's resilience is what sets him apart. He's never had much. No fancy clothes, no family wealth. But what he has, he holds tight. Raised by his single mother, a woman who worked tirelessly to keep them afloat, Ethan learned early on what it meant to care for others, even when it felt like no one cared for him. His mother, though often weary from long hours and low wages, always found time to impart wisdom. She taught him the importance of looking out for others, especially those who couldn't speak for themselves. Ethan would watch her at the local community center, helping to feed the homeless or comforting the elderly, and he admired the way she gave, even when there was little to give. His mother's teachings shaped the way he saw the world. It was a world full of struggles, but Ethan believed that even in the darkest moments, there was always room for a bit of kindness. This belief would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. The building where Ethan lived was a cold, dark place. Old and decaying, it stood in stark contrast to the vibrant life that sometimes sparked between its walls. The hallways were long and narrow, lit by dim lights that flickered intermittently. The concrete floors were chipped, the walls cracked and stained, with peeling paint that barely concealed the years of wear. It was the kind of place where people didn't look up, where heads were down, and no one asked questions. In this building, the noise of the city outside felt like a distant hum, a reminder that the world was turning, but within these walls, it felt like time itself was stuck. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the world, that Ethan's life would change forever. On this particular day, as Ethan made his way through the narrow, sterile hallway, he heard it, a faint cry. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but urgent. A sound that didn't belong in the bleak silence of the building. It was coming from somewhere near the end of the hallway, from behind a dilapidated door that had been left ajar. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He had always been aware of the quiet suffering around him, but this was different. This wasn't just another lonely voice in the distance. This was the cry of someone in need, someone who couldn't defend themselves, someone who was completely vulnerable. As he moved closer to the door, the cry grew louder, more desperate. Ethan's heart raced, but his feet moved faster. There, in the corner of the room, wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket, lay a tiny newborn baby. Its eyes were barely open, but the soft cries continued, as if the baby was calling out to the world for help. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell, the breath shallow and quick. It was so small, so fragile, lying abandoned in a cold, desolate place with no one to care for it. The shock hit Ethan hard. Who could do this? Who could leave an innocent life so helpless and vulnerable, to fend for itself in a world that would never even notice? The room around the baby was silent, save for the baby's cries. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating even. It matched the weight in Ethan's chest as he kneeled beside the baby. The smell of decay mixed with the sterile, metallic scent of the building. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to take action. But who would care for a baby in this place? Who would even think to help? Ethan felt a deep sense of urgency, his hands trembling as he reached out to gently touch the baby's head. The child, so small and fragile, seemed so alone. As his fingers brushed against the baby's soft skin, a question haunted his mind. Who would abandon something so precious? The building, this concrete jungle, had become a place where the most vulnerable were forgotten, left behind in the noise of the city and the indifference of the world. The kind of place where people walked past, heads down, too busy or too distracted to notice the child in need. It was the perfect place for something like this to happen, where a cry could go unheard, where a life could be discarded without anyone caring. Ethan knew this world well. He knew how easy it was for people to turn a blind eye, to forget those who couldn't fight for themselves. But Ethan was different. He had always been taught to look for the light in the darkness, to reach out when others would turn away. He wasn't going to ignore this baby. He wasn't going to let this moment pass without trying to help. His heart, though young, was full of courage. He had been raised to believe that no matter how small you are, you have the power to make a difference. And today, standing there in that dark corner of the world, Ethan was about to prove it. As he gently scooped the baby into his arms, he didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know who would help him or if anyone would even listen. But he knew one thing for sure. This was his moment. He wasn't going to let the baby's cries go unanswered. Not today. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he cradled the tiny, fragile baby in his arms. The newborn's hands trembled, the skin cold to the touch, and its cries, soft at first, but now growing louder, cut through the silence of the building. His first instinct was to protect the baby, to shield it from whatever cruel fate had been thrust upon it. The soft weight of the infant against his chest was all the confirmation he needed. This was no longer just a random encounter, no ordinary day. This was a moment of responsibility that would change everything. His mind raced, desperate for a solution. The baby's cries echoed in the hallway, a stark contrast to the quiet indifference that had always filled the building. He wasn't sure where to go, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just leave the baby here. He couldn't walk away like so many others had. Ethan turned on his heel and ran to the building manager's office, the baby's cries growing louder with each step. His legs felt heavy, his chest tight with panic, but he pushed forward. He found the building manager sitting behind a cluttered desk, tapping away at a computer, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. Ethan rushed in, breathless. "Please, you have to help me. There's a baby. Someone left it in the hallway." The manager didn't even look up. "Kid, go on. I'm busy," he muttered, clearly uninterested. "No, you don't understand. It's a baby. Someone abandoned it. It's in danger." Ethan's voice cracked, his words tumbling out faster than he could think. The manager looked up briefly, raising an eyebrow before returning his gaze to the screen. "You're probably just imagining things, kid. Go back to your room." Ethan stood there, his heart sinking. He wasn't imagining things. The baby was real, but his pleas were met with nothing but cold dismissal. He turned to leave, the weight of the baby growing heavier in his arms, the desperation setting in. He needed help. But where could he turn? Ethan ran to the tenants in the building, knocking on doors, hoping someone would listen. He was met with mocking laughter or cold stares. One woman, a tenant he recognized, opened the door and scoffed when he explained what he had found. "A baby? What are you talking about, kid? You sure you're not just playing some prank?" Ethan's chest tightened, and the baby's cries became more frantic, more desperate. He could feel the baby's tiny body trembling in his arms, its breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. He wasn't playing a prank. This was real. He wasn't imagining it. But as the woman slammed the door in his face, he was forced to face a harsh truth. No one would believe him. Frustration bubbled up inside him. How could they be so blind? How could they just ignore the suffering of an innocent life? The weight of the baby in his arms felt like 100 pounds now, but Ethan's resolve only hardened. He couldn't give up. Not now. Not when the baby needed him the most. With no one willing to help, Ethan had no choice but to carry the baby through the building. The hallways seemed endless, and with each step, his fear grew. The cries of the baby echoed in the cold, empty corridors, a stark reminder that time was running out. He passed by door after door, knocking frantically, but each was answered with silence or an empty stare. No one cared. No one seemed to notice the urgency of the situation. His thoughts raced. How could no one hear this baby's cries? How could no one see what was happening? The building was filled with people who lived their lives right next door to the suffering, but who chose to ignore it, to turn a blind eye when the world around them needed compassion the most. Ethan's legs were beginning to ache, his arms trembling from the weight of the baby. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep walking. Each passing second felt like an eternity. He wasn't strong enough to carry the baby forever, but the baby needed him. He couldn't let it fall through the cracks like everything else in this broken building. The baby's cries grew louder, more urgent, and with it, Ethan's desperation grew. What if he didn't make it in time? What if the baby didn't survive the cold, the neglect, the indifference that surrounded them? The thought made his heart ache, and for a moment he faltered, his grip loosening. But then the baby cried again, and Ethan's determination surged. He couldn't stop now. Each step he took felt like a challenge, each hallway stretching on forever. But no matter how far he walked, how many doors he knocked on, no one came to his aid. The building felt emptier with each passing moment, more hollow, like a place where hope had long since abandoned its tenants. But in Ethan's heart, there was still something that pushed him forward. He wouldn't let the baby fall through the cracks, not while he still had the strength to fight. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan reached the end of the hallway, his legs weak, his breath ragged. There, at the end of the corridor, he saw a figure, a neighbor, someone who had never really looked his way before. The man's expression was unreadable, but when he saw the baby in Ethan's arms, something changed. He stepped forward, his face softening, a rare moment of humanity flickering in his eyes. "Give me the baby, son," the man said softly. Ethan hesitated, the relief washing over him. He'd found someone who could help. He handed the baby over, and as the man cradled the fragile infant, Ethan felt a surge of hope. For the first time, he knew that even in the darkest moments, there could be a glimmer of light. He wasn't alone, and the baby wasn't alone anymore either. As Ethan made his way down the long, dimly lit hallway, his arms cradling the baby, the weight of the situation seemed to grow heavier with every step. His thoughts were a blur of worry and exhaustion. He'd been running through the building, knocking on doors, pleading for help, and with each rejection, he felt the crushing weight of the world's indifference pressing down on him. Yet he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the baby's tiny cries echoed through the concrete jungle, a constant reminder of the helplessness he felt. It was only when he reached the end of the hallway that someone finally stopped him. A woman, A neighbor he vaguely recognized stood at her door, her eyes widening in shock as she saw the baby in Ethan's arms. She hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of what to make of the situation. But then, without saying a word, she rushed to Ethan's side, her face now filled with concern. "Is that a baby?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, relief flooding him. "Please help me. I've been trying to get someone to listen." The woman's eyes flickered with disbelief for a moment, then softened with understanding. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, dialing emergency services. Ethan could barely breathe as he watched her talk into the phone, explaining the situation. The weight of the baby in his arms felt lighter now, like a burden had been shared. But it wasn't over yet. The baby's cries were still loud, piercing through the walls, and Ethan knew they needed help fast. Within minutes, the authorities arrived, accompanied by security personnel from the building. Ethan, though physically drained, stood his ground, watching as the scene unfolded around him. The baby was gently taken from his arms and placed into the hands of paramedics, who immediately began checking its vital signs. Ethan's eyes never left the small, fragile figure wrapped in the dirty blanket. Despite the chaos around him, his focus remained clear. The baby's safety was what mattered. As the paramedics took the baby away to get medical attention, the building manager arrived at the scene, flanked by several other tenants who had gathered in the hallway. They had heard the commotion, seen the officers, and now stood in silence, watching everything unfold. The building manager, who had dismissed Ethan earlier, approached him with a sheepish expression. He looked uncertain, as if something had shifted in him, something he couldn't quite explain. "We've been reviewing the security footage," he said, his voice low. It looks like you were right all along." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The building manager wasn't talking about his usual indifference. He was acknowledging the truth. The footage from the security cameras revealed what Ethan had tried to tell them all along. The baby had been abandoned, left there by someone with no care or consideration for its life. The footage showed the baby being left in the hallway, the cold metal doors closing behind the person who had discarded it. Ethan's face flushed with a mixture of anger and relief. For the first time, the building's residents began to see what had been right in front of them all along. The footage didn't lie. The baby had been left to die. It was a reality no one could ignore anymore. The tenants and the building manager exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan watched as their faces slowly morphed from disbelief to guilt. The indifference they had shown him, the dismissive laughter and cold shoulders, they all seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a deep and undeniable shame. Ethan had tried to warn them, tried to be the voice of reason, but they hadn't listened. Now they had no choice but to confront the ugly truth of their actions, or lack thereof. As the crowd around him started to murmur, some residents expressing regret, others discussing what would happen next, Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the baby, who had now been taken into an ambulance, its cries now soft and distant. His heart ached, but he couldn't bring himself to feel pride in the recognition that was beginning to fall upon him. The crowd had started to notice him in a new light. Whispers of admiration spread like wildfire. "The kid saved that baby," one of them said. "He's a hero." Ethan didn't hear it. He didn't need to. What mattered was the baby's survival. Ethan wasn't interested in the applause, the praise, or the attention that suddenly came his way. All he cared about was the baby, the one who had no voice, the one no one cared about, until Ethan decided to stand up for it. In that moment, Ethan realized something fundamental. His courage, his actions, had changed the narrative. He wasn't just a poor, overlooked kid in a broken building anymore. He was someone who had taken action, who had fought against the tide of apathy and indifference. As the building manager finally turned to him, his face somber and reflective, he said quietly, "You did good, kid. I'm sorry. We all should have done better." But Ethan, his face still filled with determination, just nodded. His mission was complete. He had done what was right, no matter the consequences. In a world that so often failed to see the value in the innocent and the vulnerable, Ethan had proven that true heroism comes not from age or strength, but from the heart. After the authorities had taken the baby into their care, the building fell into a heavy silence. The urgency of the moment had passed, but the impact of Ethan's actions lingered in the air, filling the hallways with a new kind of tension, one of realization, of shame, and of gratitude. As the paramedics prepared to leave, they assured Ethan that the baby would be taken to the hospital, and that, with any luck, the child would survive. Ethan's heart, which had been pounding with fear for so long, began to slow, but his mind was still racing. In the days that followed, the community around him began to shift. People who had once dismissed him as just another poor kid, invisible in the midst of the world's chaos, now saw him in a different light. The security footage of the abandoned baby, and the way Ethan had carried it through the building, seeking help when no one would listen, became the talk of the town. But it wasn't until the baby was reunited with its parents that the full weight of Ethan's actions was understood. The parents, a wealthy couple who had been devastated by their child's abandonment, were overwhelmed with relief when they were finally told the baby was safe. They rushed to the hospital, their faces etched with worry, but their joy was undeniable when they saw their child in the care of medical professionals. They wept with gratitude as they held their baby once again, and it was then that the full truth came to light. A reporter who had been covering the story approached the couple, seeking comment on the baby's rescue. The parents, still emotional, spoke to the reporter about their overwhelming sense of gratitude. But then, something unexpected happened. The husband, a tall man with a sharp suit and tired eyes, turned to the reporter and spoke directly to the camera. "We are forever grateful to the young boy who saved our child," he said, his voice shaky but sincere. "We had no idea that someone, especially a child, would be the one to care for our baby when no one else did. He showed us what true heroism is, and we'll never forget it." The media coverage soon spread far beyond the local news station, reaching places that Ethan had never imagined. His act of bravery, his refusal to give up on the baby despite all the rejection he faced, became a symbol of hope for many. But for Ethan, the attention was not what mattered. What mattered was that the baby was safe, that he had made a difference when no one else would. However, the most unexpected twist was yet to come. The baby's parents, overwhelmed by Ethan's courage and selflessness, sought him out. They knew they could never repay him for what he had done, but they felt that there was something they could give him. They came to the building one afternoon, the same building where Ethan had fought so hard to save the baby. Ethan was at the corner store when they arrived, but when he came back, they were waiting for him in the lobby. Their expressions were kind but serious. The husband, the one who had spoken on television, stepped forward. "Ethan," he began, his voice steady but with a layer of emotion, "we don't know how to thank you for what you've done for our family. You've saved our baby's life, and for that, we'll be forever grateful. But we also know that there is something more we can offer you." Ethan blinked, confused. He had done what he thought was right, not expecting anything in return. But the couple's next words changed everything. "We want you to come live with us," the wife said, her voice soft, but filled with conviction. "We'd like to adopt you, Ethan. You're a part of our family now, and we want to give you a home, a safe place to grow and be who you truly are." Ethan stood frozen, his mind struggling to grasp what was happening. The idea of a family, a real family, was something he had never dared to imagine. All his life, he had lived in the shadows, never fully seen by anyone, just another kid trying to survive. But now, here they were, this couple, these strangers, offering him a life he had never thought possible. For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. He was overwhelmed, emotions flooding through him, gratitude, disbelief, hope. But then slowly he nodded, the smallest smile creeping onto his face. This was his chance for a life where he wouldn't have to fight every day just to be heard. The couple smiled warmly, and in that moment, something shifted in Ethan. He wasn't just the kid who saved the baby anymore. He was a part of something bigger, something beautiful. He had not only changed the life of a helpless child, but his own as well. As Ethan walked with his new family through the doors of the building that had once been his world, he felt the weight of the past slowly lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he was truly seen. The walls of the building, the cold, indifferent hallways, faded behind him. He was stepping into a new world, a world where he was loved, where his courage mattered, and where he could finally have the chance to grow. Ethan's story was a powerful reminder to everyone who witnessed it, that no one is too small to make a difference. A single act of kindness, a single moment of bravery can break down walls of prejudice, indifference, and apathy. Ethan had shown the world that compassion has the power to change lives, not just for the person who receives it, but for the person who gives it too. And in the end, it was Ethan's heart, his courage, and his love for others that truly made him a hero. Ethan's story proves that true heroism isn't about strength or age. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one else will. His courage, despite the overwhelming odds, saved a life, changed hearts, and created a family where there once was none. What started as a simple act of caring for an abandoned baby became a moment of transformation, not just for Ethan, but for everyone who witnessed his bravery. In a world where indifference and apathy can often be the norm, Ethan showed us that even the smallest among us can have the strength to stand up for what's right. What Ethan didn't know when he found the baby in that cold, dark hallway was that his actions would ripple out in ways beyond anything he could have imagined. His refusal to back down, even when the adults around him rejected him and dismissed his pleas for help, demonstrated a kind of inner strength that transcended his young age. In the face of rejection, Ethan remained determined. His selflessness and willingness to fight for the life of another, even one as vulnerable as a baby, reminded us all of the power of compassion and the importance of standing up when others remain silent. Throughout the story, we saw how Ethan's act of courage transformed not just the life of the baby, but also his own life. He was no longer the overlooked, dismissed child from a struggling neighborhood. He became a beacon of hope, showing that heroism isn't just about being strong or powerful. It's about doing what's right when it's hard. Ethan's actions proved that courage comes in many forms, and even in a world that may seem indifferent, there is always room for a small act of kindness to spark real change. But Ethan's story didn't end there. His heroism was recognized not just by the people in his building, but by those who had the power to change his life forever. The wealthy parents of the baby, moved by his bravery, gave Ethan the opportunity to start anew. They saw in him not just a boy who had saved their child, but a boy who had the capacity for love, courage, and compassion, qualities that transcend wealth or status. By adopting him, they gave him a family, a chance at a better future, and the love he had longed for. In doing so, they not only changed Ethan's life, but also set an example for the rest of the world to follow, that heroism can come from the most unexpected places, and that acts of kindness can create bonds stronger than anything money can buy. As we reflect on Ethan's story, we are reminded of the power of one person to make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. It challenges us to look beyond what is expected and to recognize the potential in others, no matter their age, background, or circumstance. Ethan showed us that true bravery doesn't always come in the form of physical strength. It comes from the heart. It's about standing up when no one else will and doing what's right, even when it's the hardest thing to do. So, I want to ask you, have you ever had to stand alone for what you believe is right? Maybe you've faced a situation where it felt like no one was listening, or the people around you didn't understand. How did that experience change you, or those around you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration someone else needs to stand up and make a difference. If Ethan's story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share this video. Let's spread the message of kindness, courage, and hope. Join the conversation and share this with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest act of bravery can change the world. Together, we can create a ripple effect of compassion that spreads far beyond what we might ever expect. Thank you for being part of this journey with Ethan. And remember, sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come from the most unexpected places. Keep your heart open, and you never know where you might find your chance to make a difference.